With 2024 drawing to a close, now is the time to recap some of the best releases of the year. I think I speak for most of us in the content creating space as there hasn't been anything really new and engaging for us to look into. I think that's largely because we've been experiencing the tail end of the 2020 production slowdown, and I think we're now at a point that when we move into 2025, we're going to see more excitement. We're going to see a bit more of a diversified portfolio. I wouldn't say it's been the most exciting year for watch releases, but then again, some incredible watches have crept in out of nowhere. From some of the best chronographs that I can picture in a long time to experimental designs, ones that have really caught my interest. Some of the major brands, they haven't delivered at all this year. Maybe one or two pieces that are worth looking at, otherwise very little. Where other brands have come out of the woodwork and really given us pieces to talk about. So for this end of year recap, I've been quite conservative with the watch choices. I've only chosen 30 or so pieces instead of the usual 40 plus. But these pieces, I do believe one way or another that they encapsulate Q1 all the way to Q4 2024. And in this, I've also included my 5 favorites. If I had choice of the litter, these are the ones I would go for. Design, history, manufacture, and general appeal, all of which they factor into the choices that go into this video. Let's start with the Longines Conquest Central Power Reserve, a piece that arrived at the very start of the year and a callback to a classic design. What appealed to me so much about this watch, not only the design, the level of detail and finish on this piece, especially when we look to the dial, but it's the function of that power reserve. It's where the date complication is situated, and it's how well it serves as both a sports watch and a dress watch. I do like the marriage of those two aspects. And if we were to transport ourselves back to when this watch was new, this was very much in vogue. This was the style of the time. What is a surprise is that Longines did not deliver on anything truly exciting this year, except one other piece that I've highlighted. They have instead been very selective with the choices of watches they've given us in 2024, and instead given the opportunity to a brand like Omega, a brand that's going to feature quite heavily in this video. The Hoya Carrera glass box Daytona 9 in green. It's quite a mouthful. So I'm probably in the minority here talking about this watch and appreciating it. As a design, it's very bold, it's very out there, and as we know, the Carrera Glassbox line has continually been improving. This to me is everything Avant Garde that I want Tag Heuer to experiment with. Modern design, yes, but pulling from a very specific point in history. I think 1964, if I remember right, one of the earliest Heuer chronographs to ever have a date complication. Most makers at this point, they wouldn't go so far to reduce a piece down to its core essentials. Who gets rid of running seconds and a 12-hour totalizer today? And ultimately, it's that minimalism alone that makes it such a great piece and allows it to stand out. You can't really go too far without talking about the integrated bracelet sports watch. Don't worry, there aren't going to be too many in this video. But the Piaget Polo 79, much like the Vacheron Constantin 222, playing on that heritage, history, and the design that made the Polo line what it is today. Much like so many watches of this era that were created by jewelry designers, this one is no exception. And the through-line contrast of polishing and brushing, how the bracelet links interconnect. There is something very charming about this design, albeit gaudy and a little bit over the top by today's standards. It definitely feels and appears like a piece from the late 70s, early 80s. This watch took us all by surprise, I think. Arrived from Zenith, one of the best watches of the year. The Chronomaster Original Triple Calendar. Now that watch was good enough by itself, but the Hodinkee edition, this one is truly great. Not only the fact that they have squeezed a full calendar into this chronograph, something very reminiscent of a brand like Universal Genève, and I have a belief that UG is going to be asking for these movements from Zenith. They're going to create some kind of deal. But seeing Hodinkee's minimalist spin on this concept, adding meteorite subdials with a black on black finish. Now, not only is this watch one of the best chronographs of 2024, but it's also one of the best watches of the last, I would say, 5 years. A really exquisite piece of design, and unfortunately, limited edition, we're never going to get our hands on them, but one can dream. Now, the Tudor Black Bay chronograph has had quite a renaissance year, beginning with the Pink Dial, Pink Pig into Miami version. This one got a lot of press coverage, became insanely popular overnight. I think largely because of the speculations, because of the limited edition aspect, the limited releases. But their boutique blue chronograph definitely took the top spot. Now earlier I did talk about playing it safe, where the Daytona 9 chronograph is a lot more experimental and exciting. This one does lean into the safer category for sure. But the great areas of improvement is seeing the 5-link bracelet, is seeing this exuberant dial, red accent colors and how they pair with the silver subdials. I've spoken about this before, but the Black Bay collection receiving these brush dials, it completes the package. It adds a lot more of a premium feel to the collection. Another one of my favorites this year, bar none, the Girard-Perregaux Laureato Titanium chronograph. Nothing unique or special about this particular GP chronograph except the fact that it's in full titanium with a complementary grey dial. Its design is so solid and well-rounded. And personally, I think it's the best Laureato chronograph they've ever made because of that simplicity. Because of that distillation down to its core fundamentals and a brilliant use of material. A piece that has not been widely spoken about, but a piece that is, I'm saying this a lot now, my favorite chronograph of the year is the Angelus Instrument de Vitesse Mono Pusher. It just looks like your basic timing instrument, no date, no superfluous details, doesn't even have subdials. Referring to that idea of returning to basics, this is definitely a piece that embodies that. Single pusher to start, stop, and reset the central chronograph hand, and away you go. And its gilt accent gets me every time. As you probably know, I am a sucker for Arabic numerals on a dial. The standout watch from Patek Philippe this year, if we're talking about controversy, then it's the Cubitus. I made a whole video about that watch. It was pretty fun to put together. But the 5236P salmon dial inline perpetual calendar is arguably one of their most beautiful. Not that this complication is new or the watch line is new, but the use of the salmon dial completes the image of the 1960s, the 1950s feel. One of the main standouts is the Disco Volante style case, those pointed lugs, very particular time period. The Jaeger-LeCoultre Duometre was of course one of the biggest releases of this year. Don't need me to talk too much about it, just insane complication. JLC once again improving that they are brilliant at what they do. These pieces perfectly marry the high-end complication with technology of watchmaking. Lunga, once again, they came to the party with a very exclusive piece. The Datograph Perpetual Calendar Tourbillon Lumen in honey gold. You know, Lunga takes an amazing watch like the Datograph and then just adds more asterisks next to it. A perpetual calendar, a tourbillon, lumen, so you can see through the dial, you can see it glow in the dark, as well as the fact that it's in one of their best metals. They just don't seem to stop. Yet another standout from Tudor this year was the Black Bay 58 GMT. This Black Bay in particular has to be included because it's one of the watches we have asked for, the last 5 years, the last half decade. Tudor has finally listened and delivered a thinner case, 39mm diameter, a Coke-inspired GMT with gilt elements. And I think this being the new foundation, this being the new starting point to the collection, we're going to see a lot more evolve from this line in the coming years. Another significant gem of 2024, a chronograph, the Cartier Torture Monopusher. The brand bringing back this classic design in a limited number of pieces, sure. What makes this watch so influential in what it does is it shows you just how ahead of the time Cartier was. 100 years as a design and it still looks just as relevant today, even with the Monopusher chronograph feature included. From its gorgeous case shape to the placement of the subdials, the use of the Breguet hands, the Roman numerals, we could be here all day talking about it. It is an exceptional watch and an exceptional collection. As we have worked out by now, Rolex didn't really come to the party this year. It didn't give us anything truly noteworthy to talk about besides maybe the standard steel grey and black GMT. The solid gold Sea Dweller was worth covering for the novelty factor, I guess. It's quite comedic. The phasing out of the white gold Le Mans Daytona and replacing it with the yellow gold version. The only watch that truly stood out from the brand this year was the 1908 in platinum. And it was mainly because of that gorgeous in-house guilloche finished turquoise dial. So here we're all hoping that 2025 we get something more notable and worth talking about. Even though the 1908, it's an interesting direction for the brand to take their watches. Now Grand Seiko delivered some interesting watches this year. A recreation of their original High Beat, which they're asking a ludicrous amount of money for as a stainless steel watch. But also this, the Birch Bark, the SLG W003 and their other variants as well. And much like a handful of other pieces that we've looked at, like the Torture Monopusher, this piece encapsulates what Grand Seiko is all about. I think everything from the dial texture, the finishing, the choice of hands, the choice of plots. It's a callback to some of their original design motifs, but it is modernized in a lot of ways too. Especially when we look to the movement at the back. The power reserve is there, it's not on display. An 80-hour power reserve, bear in mind. It is just a beautiful thing thanks to its simplicity, and it speaks to Grand Seiko's design everywhere. Had to include this watch because no one else seems to care or talk about it. The Zenith Defy Diver A3648. Not everyone's cup of tea. It does look like a Doxer, but the fact that Zenith is bringing back the dive watch, that they're looking back into their archives and they're starting anew. It's a great avenue for the brand to explore because as we know, Zenith seems solely defined by the El Primero. I'm not going to talk about it. But as a design, this Defy Diver looks like a barnacle on the wrist, great choices of colors, and like the original, what made it such a forward-thinking design, believe it or not, 600 meters of water resistance, which is something that even a brand like Rolex wasn't able to compete with at the time without a helium escape valve. Yet another excellent chronograph delivered to us this year, the Parmigiani Fleurier Toric chronograph. So Parmigiani, building on this minimalist collection that they seem to be delivering, they have given us a very straightforward chronograph design. And it's something that is bold, that is experimental. It's something that would take us by surprise and we would have to look at it a few times to discern what it is. But sometimes going back to your basics and bringing forward a strong foundation to build on is the best thing. And I believe that they've had a lot of success with this line and where it's going. This one I've selected as a Rattrapant. I believe it's a double split chronograph. And much like the Laureato titanium chronograph, this one with its through line colorway is what completes the look. A piece that stole the show for me this year, which is something that I never thought I would say. From IDGuy, the Remastered 2. No doubt, this one is the opinion divider. You either love it or you hate it. Much like the Cybertruck, this watch embodies a lot of that DNA. But the design guy in me sees this and thinks, you know, it just works. Brutalism, minimalism, hard edges, faceted lines. And it's the asymmetry, it's the offsetting that also does it for me. It's a piece that I would so gladly wear because of its obscurity. And it's such a bold step to take this concept, reintroducing this classic design in white gold with a gorgeous navy blue colorway. You can't go wrong. And since we're talking about Genta-inspired designs and jewelry design and all of that, integrated bracelets, the Creedor locomotive also arrived this year. A lesser known Gerald Genta design. He was obviously tasked to create these watches in succession, and this one seems to be assembled from a parts bin in many ways. You can see some royal oak in there for sure. But then again, just like the remaster, I would gladly wear this watch because it dares to be different. And its design is both fascinating and head-scratching. You don't really know whether it's complete or not. Now, where I did say earlier in the video that Longines hasn't really delivered on anything truly exciting, besides the Central Power Reserve Conquest, this one, on the other hand, actually takes the top spot. The Zulu Time 39mm in titanium. First off, without even needing to look at the watch, what's not to like about this combination? The Goldilocks size and the choice of material is great enough. Adding to the fact that it's a GMT complication, it's a sports watch, even better. I think the reason why this piece didn't get as much coverage as it deserved is that the dial didn't necessarily jump off the page. And yes, we could argue that was never the point. This watch is supposed to be subdued and simple. For that reason, it wins. And now entering the second half of 2024, Omega just decides to step up their game big time. I believe that they brought out the white dial Speedmaster in the early part of the year, but the 38mm gloss black dial Aquaterra is where things started. I think in the video about this watch I said it's the very best and the very worst of Omega, because while they created such a gorgeous watch, they also decided to go with an almost entirely polished finish, which threw off the sports detail that made this watch so significant. But the greatest success is in its scale, it's in its size. 38mm for a watch like this is perfection. And I also believe they brought out an olive green dial variant of the Aquaterra in 38mm that we have barely seen any press coverage about. Continuing on with horology, Kari Voutilainen celebrated his 20th anniversary with his original tourbillon recreated. From the color choices, the size, scale, the tapisserie, the guilloche, finishing on this dial. It is his magnum opus and it says everything you need to know about Kari Voutilainen and the sort of work he does. Now off the top of my head, I didn't list this watch, but the Kari Voutilainen has reminded me. I think this year Ricep brought out a beautiful True Beat chronometer with diamond indices. I believe he's only making 10 of those. What a standout watch. That's just a small addition adding on to that, but we're talking about high horology. What about the BG859 Paris Olympics watch given to us by Omega? One of the quietest releases of the year, and I think one of their best watches by a country mile. Taking the CK859 formula, modifying it, especially when you look to the dial. We now have sector elements, we have polishing, we have guilloche. One of the best improvements, because there is now depth and a bit more reaction to the light, the dial architecture seems so much more better placed and proportioned here. I so wish these watches were more affordable, because this does everything that I wanted the CK859 to do, and I would snap one of these up immediately. After singing the praises of the AP Remaster, the Anoma A1, a smaller brand that has just started, that has delivered on a similar concept. Industrial design all the way through. It's that blend of organic, rounded forms with sharp, angular lines that completes the look of this piece. And I can imagine it took a long time for them to come up with the final concept, but this piece inspired by forms in nature. It has a flow. It gives you a sense that there is movement to this watch, and that I think is the best element of all. The return of one of the oldest watch brands in the world, Fratello. And they've delivered a range of dive watches. One of my favorites, of course, is the tribute piece. I'd have to refer to my notes again. I think it's a 1965 model. Of course, it has all of the idiosyncrasies of that time period, like a fully polished case, bracelet, you name it. But the application of lume, the choice of handset, the plots on the dial, it works very nicely. I especially like the date window with the magnifying lens on top of it. This being the start of a brand like Fratello, I'm sure it's going to go in the same direction as a brand like Nevada Grenchen, which is only a good thing. Now, after last year's arrival or return of a more faithful but less faithful Breguet Type 20, this piece I think was created in a way to remedy that. Maybe not. The Type 20 in gold and ceramic, I think, addressed a lot of issues that we had with last year's models, but also does in a way build on these issues. I find it to be an oddity, and maybe that's why I'm including it. The brand really had to do less with this range, but instead they've decided to just add more and more. But saying all of that, I do enjoy the complementary colors. As a fanboy of the Type 20 design, especially the originals from the 50s and 60s, I like seeing the modernized version of this watch with applied numerals, with a large big eye subdial, the ceramic bezel with correct GMT markers. Call me mad, I wouldn't be surprised, but I do have a love-hate thing with this watch. I like it, but for all the wrong reasons. And now what we could agree to be one of the golden watch launches of this year, the return, the second generation First Omega in space. Everything about this watch I like, maybe besides the faux lume on the dial. Everything that the first generation watch maybe lacked, the second generation has picked up the baton, moved it so far ahead. From the applied Omega logo, the correct script, the Alpha style hands, the correct Ed White style bracelet, the use of petrol blue to add so much excitement to the look. And we cannot discount the plexiglass looking sapphire crystal. I said in my Breitling 765 review, the reason why I didn't go after a Speedmaster was that there's nothing about the first Omega in space that really drew me in, which was the model that I was most interested in. But this second generation, it's flipped the script. The FOIS was an absolute smash hit from the brand this year. I'd even go so far to say the best watch that Omega delivered this year. Now, back to back, two of the most beautiful black dial watches you could ever own yourself. Breguet delivering on the Platinum 5177 Grand Faux enamel. Not much needs to be said about this watch, or the Moon Phase Power Reserve variant, but what I admire most about this particular classique, the colorway, the choice of material, it's one of the most under-the-radar dress watches you could ever choose to wear. In platinum, with a gloss black dial. 99.9% of people will just think it's an everyday wearing watch. If you're an enthusiast and you know what you're looking at, it is something truly significant. And next to it, Lange celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Lange 1 in a perfect package. Just look at this thing. And the true significance, and what makes it stand out so much for the Lange enthusiast out there, is the fact that the date window is color matched with the dial. Something that's not the case very often when you see a black dial Lange. Having to choose between the 5177 Classique enamel or this Lange 1, insanely difficult, and that's why I think they work best as a pairing. And one final chronograph to make the best of releases list, the JLC Reverso chronograph in pink gold. How cool is this watch? Last year's rebirth, refounding of the Reverso chronograph has obviously brought forth all these incredible designs, and we're going to see many more in the future. But a watch of this quality, this caliber, with this color choice of pink gold that flows everywhere, from the case to the dial to the movement architecture. Yes, we could say it's a little bit excessive, sure. But these Reverso chronos, they are gifts that keep on giving. Now we can't wrap up this video without covering what is my favorite Tudor release in the last 3 years. The FXD GMT, of course. Not only the fact that this is the first Pelagos GMT that they ever created, but the fact that they used the FXD chassis as the foundation to build on. It's quite a bold idea. Now, no doubt we're going to see a Pelagos 39mm GMT released, maybe next year, maybe the year after. But what I like about this watch is how it's been tied in with the military application. How it's using an all-black finish, olive drab, bright orange as the spot color. Like the FOIS Omega, I'm not so much of a fan of the choice of lume that was used, but I think this was done to separate it from the US Navy variant. More than anything, I'm so glad that the FXD was the watch chosen to be put under the spotlight again. It deserves the praise and the attention. Now that it has a GMT complication, it should bring in a new audience. Now the CMOS Professional has seen quite a few updates this year, not all good. An 8806 caliber, no date, matte black dial with the gorgeous wave pattern. A lot of small improvements around that front. Many of these new models now coming standard with mesh bracelets, that's something else. But the watch that stood out to me the most from the selection of steel SMPs was in fact the bronze gold and olive green variant that came out a week or two later. I think I enjoy it most purely because of the color contrast and the choice of green used. How popular is bronze, gold, and green going to be? Probably not at all. This sort of watch from Omega, looking at the Seamaster Professional playing with different colors and materials, it shows that the brand is still willing to experiment. But like most of you, I just wish that this watch arrived in 40mm. They could have tightened up the proportions a little bit more, made it slightly thinner. So yeah, there are quite a few drawbacks with this watch. We're losing a lot, we're gaining little. And Omega just kept dropping more and more watches as the weeks went by. Last but not least, the flight qualified Speedmaster. Using the coaxial caliber, it's very different to the first Omega in space. Is it as good as the FOIS? I don't believe so. Bonus is the fact that it's an automatic movement, that it has quite a militaristic style to it. It's definitely a Flightmaster. The diameter is slightly bigger and its thickness is on the cusp of 15mm, which is the biggest drawback. But the design of this watch is gorgeous. It's one of the most innovative looking Speedmasters that we have seen in a while. The contrasts of silver, black, orange, light blue, yellow. Yet another good example of great design, of adding so many small details to an already busy looking watch. And so to round off this short list of 2024, I've also chosen 5 watches from this list that I would go after immediately if I could. The Angelus Monopusher, the AP Remaster 2, the Zenith Chronomaster Original Hodinkee Edition, the first Omega in Space Speedmaster, and the FXD GMT. As far as a 5-watch collection goes, you could do worse. It also goes to show that the selection of watches were pretty diverse and varied this year. See, what I try to do with listings like these is that there are no bad choices. They're either great or greater choices. So, I'm holding on faith, believing that 2025 we will start seeing more dynamic watches released, new collections. The last 4 years has been a difficult time to plan, prepare, and produce these pieces. But in saying that, as we have noticed, watch sales haven't been as high as they were in those earlier years. So it's a catch-22. It is a clear-cut example that brands are going to have to start offering more for less, or they're not going to get the sales. And this slump in sales figures could tell us that brands are going to begin pushing the envelope even more. So if you had to choose one watch from this year's series of releases, including the ones that I probably forgot one way or another, which would it be? And as odd of a choice as it might be, given everything to choose from, I would probably go with the AP Remaster 2. Oh dear. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.